Hello and welcome to the last animation video for this tutorial series. And in this video we're going to be tackling the final animation boss, which is the reload, and it is by far the most complex one up until now. But that's okay because we're going to break it down and try to simplify it as much as possible so that you understand what's going on. So, as we've done up until now, we're going to start in the idle pose. So I'm just going to select the idle pose here. And I'm going to duplicate this one and rename it to reload. And I'm going to do the same for the assault rifle rig. So I'm going to go to the weapon reference animation and duplicate it and rename it to FP_weapon reload. Actually, it should be it should be assault rifle _reload. And what I like to do after this is to extend the timeline, so just make it larger. We don't really know exactly how long it's going to be yet. So I'm just going to set this to like 150 or something like that. And then with the assault rifle rig selected, I'm going to also select the character rig by pressing Shift and right click to select them both. And then I'm going to switch into pose mode and make sure that you can select both the gun rig and the character. And then we're basically just going to start to place out our key poses for this animation. And the way you can think about key poses is like, it's like the extreme positions of the animation. And then later on, we're going to fill in the gaps in between and add detail. So this is kind of like blocking out a sculpture, basically. Like you have like a rough block of clay and you have to like kind of chip away and create the final sculpture. So at this stage, we're just like chipping away at the very rough block and basically trying to get something to work with. So we can add some details to it later on. So with the gun bone selected, the CB gun bone, I'm gonna skip ahead a few frames in the timeline here and then just place out the gun in a pose where the character is going to be removing the magazine. Okay. So I'm gonna kind of imagine what that would look like. We can also fix this arm real quick so it doesn't bother us too much. And I usually try to keep the gun kind of to the right side of the screen here and slightly lowered so it's not covering too much of the crosshair, which would be here in the center. So we don't really want to have like the player's view be obstructed by the gun. There's just something to keep in mind. Okay. So this is our initial pose where the mag will be removed. And I'm going to copy these keyframes and just move them forward slightly. So we're holding this pose for a few frames. A bit more actually. And this is like the part where the magazine would go off screen. But we're not going to animate that just yet. And then I'm also going to create a pose for when the magazine is inserted into the gun. So I'm skipping ahead a few frames here. I'm gonna zoom in. And I'm creating the next pose, which I guess you can call like the mag insert pose. It doesn't really have any official names, but I'm sure you can come up with something of your own. And again, these are just very rough poses. We're definitely going to be changing these as we make the animation, so we don't have to worry about it too much. And now if we scroll through here, we can see that we have the mag out pose going into the mag in pose. And I'm also going to copy this one and extend it a bit. And then finally, we just want the gun to go back into the idle pose again. So I'm just going to copy the first keyframes and place them here at the end. And we don't have to worry too much about the timing right now. Because again, this is like the very, very rough stage. Right, so now I'm going to make the character grab the magazine. And to do that, we simply select the left hand. And this is already constrained to the magazine, so there's not going to be any issues with the interaction here. And on frame 12, I'm going to move the hand to the magazine. And again, we don't have to make like a perfect placement right now, just like a rough idea. Something like this. Might want to speed that up a little bit. And I'm also going to add some extra time here between the mag out and mag in pose. And then I'm going to also animate the magazine. So I'm selecting the gun magazine bone. And I'm going to copy the initial frame and move it up a little bit. And then right after the hand is grabbing the mag here, I'm going to wait a few frames. And then I can start animating the magazine being removed from the weapon. So I'm going to do this by pressing G and Z to move it in the local axis here. Now if we play it, it's definitely moving, which is cool. And then we can scroll ahead a little bit and just move the magazine off screen completely. And I'm also going to adjust the arm slightly here. And also create some in-between frames here just to kind of have the mag be shown more on screen before going completely behind the camera. And again, it doesn't have to look perfect at this stage. And then I'm just copying this pose where the mag is off screen. And then we can see that the gun is moving into the mag in position. And what I usually do here is I copy the pose where the mag is already fully inserted. And I place it as the last one. And then I kind of work backwards from here. So I use this as like a reference and then just move it out on the frame before that. and try to get it correctly placed. And we can also copy this pose right here for the magazine so that it holds this for a while before being pushed in here, just so it doesn't just slide in, because that looks a bit unnatural. Usually there will be some kind of like struggle to kind of try to fit it in into the gun. So a little bit of pause in between. And then again, just adding some detail in between here. And that's like the basic setup for the reload. It is technically a functioning reload already, but I will definitely add some more detail to make it look a bit more interesting. So I'm just gonna select the gun again and go back here and mess with the timing a little bit. I'm going to make this happen a bit sooner. And I'm also going to copy, actually I'm going to copy all of these bones from the first frame and just place them, well, except for the gun, everything except for the gun. So deselect the gun by using B to box select and then holding down Shift to deselect them. And then I'm just gonna Shift D, duplicate all of these and move them back here. And this is just so we get like the arm and the hand moving into the correct position here at the end. And then I'm also going to copy this pose so that the hand doesn't go back to the grip already. It should still be on the mag up until about here. And now we can see that it's coming together a lot nicer, and it's also matching the first frame, so there's no popping issues going on. And I'm just going to make the hand stay on the weapon or on the mag a little bit longer. And I'm also going to offset the gun motion a little bit. And in between the last pose and the mag pose, I'm going to also fix this hand going through the magazine here. So there's some clipping issues we could fix by moving it. so that it looks more like the hand is actually going off the magazine. And back to grabbing the gun. Alright, so now that we have our basic reload setup here, I am going to move on to adding some detail. So, for example here, where the mag is being pulled out, I'm going to add a slight kind of downwards motion to the weapon, so it looks like it's actually some force is being applied to it. So I'm moving ahead a few frames and then moving it down. And then over here, I'm going to move it back up again slightly. So we get a little bit of a bounce. Could be a bit less. And then I'm going to tweak this mag in pose slightly. And then also here, when the mag is being inserted, I'm also going to add some slight motion to the weapon. And I think this pause here is a little bit too long, so I'm just gonna lower it. So I'm gonna move these back a few frames, about 3 frames. And then I'm also going to select the same keyframes here for the gun and move them back 3 frames so it matches with the magazine. And I'm also going to move the hand up a little bit so it moves just slightly before the gun goes back as well, just so it's not perfectly synced with the motion. And now that we have some details added in, I'm just going to move on to the graph editor, which is where I usually prefer to animate details. Because it, I mean, you really get a nicer overview in the graph editor because you can actually see what's happening in between the keyframes compared to just looking at the keyframes here. So I'm going to start tweaking some of the curves here. And add in some extra keyframes as well. And I'm just basically working my way through the curves here and adding detail where I feel like it's needed. So there's not really too much to mention about this part right now. And I'm mostly looking at the camera preview here while I'm working, so I'm not really bothering too much with the viewport at the moment. So I'm mostly looking at this screen and kind of tweaking the curves based on what I'm seeing here. And if we see any issues with the arm, like for example here, the arm is kind of stretching, we don't have to worry about it for now. I'm mostly focused on the gun motion at the moment, so I don't really bother too much with what's happening with the arms. But I will fix it later, so we will get to that, don't worry. I think the ending here is a bit quick, so I'm probably gonna scale these up slightly by selecting them and pressing S and X to scale them, just to see how that would look. That was a bit too slow. Maybe just like a slight slowdown here. And now I'm going to start working on the back to idle pose here, or the back to idle transition, I guess you would call it. So just messing around with the locations again to kind of make it flow a bit nicer and feel more natural. And I usually like to add these little kind of I usually call them wiggles. I don't know if that's like the official name for it, but it's kind of like this like little bouncy motion at the end. Just so that it doesn't come to a full stop, because that can feel very robotic and stiff. So having a few frames at the end here usually helps with that. And again, this totally depends on the style you're going for. So if you're going for like a cartoony kind of goofy look, you might want to have even more bounce than this. And then if you're going for a more realistic look, you might want to tone these down quite a bit. And it's always good to use reference. So if you find some animations that you like, you can definitely look at them and see, kind of analyze how they're made, because that can also help when you're planning out your animation. For this, I'm not using any reference at the moment, but I usually would have some kind of inspiration, whether it's from another game or if it's from an actual real video of someone kind of handling a weapon. But that's definitely useful and could also get you inspired. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to using reference, really. So yeah, I mean, don't be afraid to use it, because it can be very useful. And if you feel like this part is moving a bit quick here, that's mostly because I don't really know what to mention about this part. It's mostly just me adding in detail and you know, modifying the curves based on what I'm seeing here in the camera preview. And also I don't want this video to be like hours long, which is, I mean, usually when I create reloads, it can take quite a few hours to make them. So I am trying to speed things up a little bit, just for the sake of the video. But hopefully you at least understand the principles and the method that I'm using here. If you don't, and you find this a bit confusing, you can always check out the source files, and you can see how these animations are all set up in Blender. And there's also going to be a link for that in the description, so you can check that out. Right, it's definitely starting to come together now, but I still feel like it's lacking some detail. So I'm just gonna keep fine-tuning the gun bone here until I have a result that I'm happy with. A bit too much, a bit too crazy. Gonna tone that down. And also move it. And probably tone it down even more, I think. Just so we have like some slight rotation, but nothing too insane. All right, so I'm still not super happy with the motion, but just to, again, keep this video a bit shorter, I'm gonna call this almost finished now for the gun movement, and I'm gonna move on to the magazine. So now that the gun has some detail, I'm also going to kind of polish up the movement of the magazine here. So I'm gonna slightly change the angles here that it's being taken out. And also fix any clipping issues that might happen. I'm just gonna rotate it down and fix it up a little bit. And make it move off screen a bit faster too, I think. And I'm also trying to kind of make it look like the character is pulling the magazine out of like a pocket in the torso. So unlike on the shirt or something. So I'm starting with the magazine kind of visible here in the bottom left corner. And I can also make this a bit slower. I think that was a bit too quick. And then here I am going to add some kind of, what do you call it? Like I'm basically trying to make it look like the character is struggling a bit to put the magazine in, so it doesn't just perfectly align. And the way I can do that is by going to this frame and then kind of moving the magazine so it doesn't exactly go in. It's kind of like hitting the edge here. Something like that. And then we can, in between that, kind of add some more frames. So it gives it like a bit of more detail, so it doesn't just perfectly align immediately. And once you're happy with the magazine, we can move on to fixing the hand. So we can start by going to this frame here, where the hand initially grabs the mag. And we can place out the fingers so that it looks like the character is actually holding on to the magazine. So I'm gonna kind of tweak the hand placement a little bit, and then I'm also going to start animating the fingers to, I mean, basically just make it look like the fingers are actually holding onto it and that they're touching the magazine. And we don't have to worry about these fingers too much because they're not visible on screen, as far as I can tell. Okay, so they're visible on this frame, so we do need to fix the index finger and the middle finger. I'm just gonna place them out. I'm just gonna move this one out of the way for now, so it's a bit easier to see. And I'm going to move this one back and rotate it. And I'm also going to reset the metacarpal bone here because it's kind of in the way currently. And if I haven't mentioned it before, the way you can reset rotations is by pressing Alt and R. So if a bone is rotated like this, for example, instead of going in here and modifying these ones, you can just press Alt and R to reset it. And then we also have to copy our finger placement from this frame. Because as you remember, we also copied the idle pose for the fingers at the end. So they're slowly kind of interpolating back towards that placement, which is why there's some issues here with the fingers not matching. So I'm just gonna press B to box select and then select all of these and press Shift D to duplicate them. And then as I'm dragging them closer, you can see that the fingers are going back to that pose again. And I'm gonna keep them like that up until the hand actually goes back to grab the gun again. So around here. And then we can see how that looks. And if you want, you can actually change up the hand posing between the mag out and the mag in. So for example, on the mag in, you could change the way the hand is holding the magazine. So for example, slightly rotated or has like a different finger posing or something like that, which can also help sell the effect of like, this is a new magazine, okay? Like the character grabbed a different magazine. It's not the same one, even though it is. But if you change the hand posing in between, it can actually help with the illusion of that this is a new magazine, right? I'm not going to do this for this animation because, again, it's going to take too long. But you could totally do it. So if you have some time and you want to polish this even further, you can definitely try that out. And I also copied the hand keyframes here, so that the hand is not sliding. I'm going to animate the hand when it goes from the gun to the magazine, because currently it's, I mean, there's some clipping issues and it's kind of sliding down to the mag, which can look a bit awkward. So I'm just going to kind of move it out away from the gun and then have it go back to the magazine and kind of grabbing it from underneath. just so it looks a bit more natural. And here I'm also going to animate the fingers, so it actually looks like the hand is releasing the gun and not just kind of, you know, maintaining that same finger pose throughout the whole movement. And what I usually do here is I select all of the bones with the box select tool, pressing B, and then selecting everything here. So all the fingers, and then pressing Alt R to reset them. And that kind of gives us this like open hand pose, which we can then just modify as we want. And now I'm using R to rotate, as I've done before, which is, in my opinion, the quickest way to animate. You can also use this tool, the rotate tool, and you can more like visually move them. So if you prefer that, you can definitely use that. I do prefer to press R, mainly because I'm used to it, but also I feel like it's a bit faster. So it's just, I mean, it comes down to personal preference, really, which way you prefer to work. And then I'm just going to copy the open hand pose again, move it forward a little bit so it doesn't, so that the hand doesn't start closing too early. And just trying to kind of sync it up with the actual grabbing here. So maybe move it back a bit. And the last thing for the hand is to fix this back to idle. And the main issue here is the arm stretching because the gun is too far away, so the arm doesn't reach it. And the easiest way to fix that is by copying this last keyframe and place it here, and then just move the elbow up like this in a pose that looks good. That was actually the wrong bone. I should have copied this one. And then we can also move it up a bit so it doesn't cause any issues. And I'm also going to animate the fingers here on the back to idle. And also I'm going to make the hand stay on the mag for a bit longer. And make sure that there's no clipping, so no fingers going through the mag or anything like that. And then right about here, I'm going to start opening the hand again. And for that, we can actually copy these keyframes we made over here. So we save some time, so we can just place them here. And these are the open hand finger poses. That sounded weird. But these are the keyframes for the open hand pose. And then I'm just going to tweak them so it looks better. And this way we don't have to remake the whole pose again. We can just tweak it instead of remaking them. And we can also copy them again and move them closer to here, to the last one, so that it kind of looks like the character is actually closing the fingers around the gun here, as we can see. So it's actually, we can try and time it with the actual grab, so it looks like the fingers are a bit delayed and closes on the gun. And I'm also going to move these up a little bit. And do some offsetting here for the thumb. And now if we play the whole thing, we can see that the hand looks a lot better. And as a final little fix, I am just going to animate this trigger finger here, because of course we need some trigger discipline. Can't live without that, so definitely need to animate it. And to do that, I'm just gonna skip ahead a few frames and just animate the the right side index finger so that it's not on the trigger, because that is not safe. And we definitely need to be thinking about safety. So I'm just gonna do a really simple animation here where the index finger moves off the trigger and is being placed here on the side of the gun. And then I'm gonna copy that pose and move it all the way to the back, so that it's not going back into the default pose until at the very end here. So usually when the gun is back in the idle pose, I try to move the finger back as well. Something like that. And we can also fix any clipping issues and just kind of try to tweak it so that it doesn't go through the weapon. And also you can't really see it on screen, so I mean, don't worry too much about that. It's probably fine if there's some clipping, now that I think about it. And yeah, that's basically the reload animation finished. If you want, you can also animate the camera, which I will be doing for this tutorial. So I am going to add some slight camera motion as well. And also I'm just tweaking the arm at the moment, just finishing up some final touches for the arm. And I'm also just gonna real quick just tweak the gun a little bit, just a little bit, you know? It's a tiny change. And then I'm happy, probably. Some last minute changes to the mag animation as well. And now, as a final step, I am going to animate the camera as well. And this is going to be a bit different compared to before. So I'm actually going to go through the animation frame by frame and kind of try to just match the gun movements slightly. So I'm going to move the camera like based on what's happening on screen. So basically just doing super rough placement right now. So just kind of like looking at the stuff that's happening on screen and trying to somewhat match that motion. It's not going to be perfect immediately. We definitely have to go back into the graph editor and fix this up. But at least we get something to work with. So that's cool. All right. And now if we play it back, it's going to look super rough and way too intense. So this is definitely going to need some work. So I'm going to go into the graph editor here and just start cleaning this up. And also probably change basically everything about it. But again, the process is just so that we have some keyframes to work with. It's not going to be perfect by default, so we definitely have to do this cleanup. And we can also disable everything else for now, so just the one that we're actively working on can be visible. Makes it a bit easier to see what's happening. And when it comes to the camera animation, I usually try to keep it pretty subtle, so no like insane movements at all, which can be a bit tricky. You definitely have to come back and modify these later on as well. And that's usually the process when you're making animations for games, is that once you see them in engine, so when you import them into Unreal Engine and you test them in the game, they're most likely going to feel different, they're going to look different, so you're probably going to have to come back and edit these at some point. All right, and now I'm going to enable the Z-axis and start tweaking that as well. And it's like immediately way too much. Oh Lord. It's going to lower these by quite a lot. Oh Jesus. And that's some pretty okay motion, I would say. I'm not super happy with it, but again, because of time constraints, I'm not gonna go way into detail on these ones. But it's definitely usable. Can totally see that being used. And finally, I'm also going to add some rotation. So I'm just gonna copy out a few keyframes here for the Y rotation. Just a few of those. And then hopping back into the graph editor and tweaking them. Adding like a little bit of a camera shake here at the when the mag is being removed to make it feel a bit more powerful. And then I'm also going to add in a few in between here just to so the camera isn't like completely static during this animation. And then I'm also going to do a bit of a shake here when the mag is being inserted. And finally, I am also going to add just a tiny bit of camera rotation at the end as well. Tone that down a little bit and give it a quick preview, see what it looks like. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. I think it looks all right. So as usual, I'm going to add the end marker so I know the end frame for this animation. Just going to close those down and then check the last keyframe, which is 94. So I'm going to press M and call this one end reload. And I'm also going to set the timeline end frame to 94. And then just give it a quick preview. Make sure that the first and last pose are matching, which they are. And I'm going to just check it again. And yeah, it looks good. Looks totally good. So, as usual, we are going to export this animation as well. So we're going to start with the character animation. So we switch to object mode up here, and then select the character rig, and copy the name of the animation. So I'm just going to click that and press Ctrl C. And then I'm also going to press, go to File and Export and FBX. And locate our folder, which is in the tutorial file, and then exported animations. And I'm going to use the same settings as we had before. So it's selected objects, armature, only deform bones, and then make sure that these are also enabled. And then I'm going to paste in the name and hit export. And of course, since this has some weapon animation, we also need to export the animation for the weapon rig. So if you remember from the last part, when we exported the fire animation, we first have to remove this constraint from the gun. So let's do that by pressing this little icon. And the hand will look messed up. That's fine. We can ignore that for now. And then make sure that this is the weapon animation that is applied on the weapon rig. We can check that by playing it again and seeing if the mag is moving, which it is. Perfect. And then just copy the name and go to File, Export, FBX, and then paste it in and hit Export. And now we can enable this again. So it's back into its original position. And don't forget to save. I save like at least once a minute. Yeah, do not forget to save. And also another tip that is good to keep in mind is that you can always save multiple versions of your file. So for example, if you're pretty happy with the reload, but you want to change it or modify it, always make sure you create a new version of the file and work from that one instead, because that way you can always go back to the original one if you mess up. So that's just a little something to keep in mind. All right, that's our finished reload animation. That looks like this. And that's all the animations created for this tutorial. Finished. I hope you found this useful and that you were able to follow along. And if you didn't, you can always check out the source files, and you can also go back and rewatch some of the parts that seem confusing, or if they moved a bit too quick, you can always just play them again, maybe play them in slow motion, just to see what's happening, because I know it's a lot of information, especially if you're a beginner. It can be quite confusing. So yeah, in the next part, we are going to start, well, not me actually. In the next part, I'm going to pass this on to Octavian, who's going to set up the project in Unreal Engine. So yeah, make sure you go check that out, and I hope you have a lot of fun and learn a bunch of new things. All right, guys, I'll see you. Bye-bye.